Hey everybody, welcome. Today I'm here with Jeff Witt, Master Systems Game Designer, right Jeff? And we're going to have a quick 4-part series, and every part is going to correspond to a new design tip that Jeff thinks is essential, actually critical for game design in 2021. And Jeff, your first tip you called take Clash Royale gameplay, ditch the meta systems. Could you go into what you mean by that?
Yeah, definitely. Clash Royale has proven to be very successful as a game that players enjoy playing. The real-time placement of cards, both troops and spells, is very natural to the sort of phone mechanics, and it's definitely a gameplay that not only fans of Clash Royale have enjoyed playing, but also lots of developers continue to use the gameplay as inspirations for their own games. And that makes perfect sense. The problem is that a lot of the game developers believe that if you take the gameplay, you also have to take the meta systems as they were designed in Clash Royale. And that is my tip for today is that you really don't need to do that. It's very easy to divorce the card meta system from the actual gameplay.
And Jeff, could you talk about, like, if you were to describe some of the biggest problems with the meta systems, what would those problems be?
Sure. Basically, the card economy in Clash Royale is very shallow. You have very few levels. Each level is a flat stat boost, and the costs just scale up super high. So when you get to levels 9, 10, 11, the amount of cards you need for the next level gets into the hundreds and eventually the thousands. And typically when games do this, it really just tries to slow the player down, which I think they succeed on. But the problem with that is it also slows down monetization. And that's why we've seen a decline of Clash Royale's monetization over the last 2 years. And all this is not really necessary for the success of the game. And we know that Clash Royale it is an RTS, but it can sustain a fairly heavy stat economy without disrupting the gameplay that players enjoy. And so I would, if I was working with a developer who was going to use a gameplay that's inspired by Clash Royale, I would strongly encourage not only to go deeper with the card economy than Clash Royale did, but also think of a few other systems that would also add stats to the game that players could pursue. That will give you more levers to try and monetize more off your players, but also you could be more generous with rewards and make the game feel less sort of grinding in the elder game like Clash Royale is once all your cards get up to levels 8, 9, 10, 11.
Right. And Jeff, I see you've got like this kind of chart in your blog post that kind of shows the upgrade cost and card amounts required to go up different levels. And so when you're thinking about the depth of an economy, like how would you kind of think about what's too much or too little?
There's your overall amount of cards needed to fully upgrade a single card. And then there's, the amount of upgrades. And I think that how you sort of balance the two can be the difference between something that feels okay or something that feels pretty good. So it takes about, 9,000-ish cards to go from level 1 to 12 if you're a common, but that's over 12 levels. You could take that same 9,000 and do it over, say, 30 levels. And what that does is for players, the amount of cards they need for that next level, for that next stat boost, is a lot more manageable, which makes the grind ahead of them feel better than the feeling that, oh crap, I need to get 3,000 more cards until the next level. That's never going to feel good unless you reward cards. It's a much more accelerated pace. So for this, not only would, if I want to add more depth to this, not only would I increase the amount of overall cards you need to max out a card, but I would have the levels go up into the 40, 50, 60 range and have the card costs sort of be smoother from level to level to make sure that each new level is always within distance. If I grind a little more, if I spend to open the chest, I'll be within striking distance of that next level. And that's, you always want to leave players within striking distance of that next dealing of progression so that they get that positive emotional hit. Right. And that's something that Clash Royale's balancing doesn't really do at the Elder game.
Right. And Jeff, in terms of let's say you were to elongate the level progression and the card progression, I guess one other impact of that would be sort of stretching out your player base from a matchmaking perspective, right? In terms of trophy count and things of that nature. And so how do you think about that, or how would you weigh the matchmaking relative to the, which is a very big problem that you're mentioning, right? I have no desire to ever pay again in Clash Royale just because, I don't feel like I need to, because it is so shallow, to your point. But then, what would be the other factors that you need to consider when you stretch out the progression?
Well, so, Clash Royale's, trophy system, it does a good job serving as a proxy for the combination of stats and skill of a player. So theoretically, adding more stats by elongating this system may not need an adjustment in the formula. But if we find that the stat differences between players are growing more and more divergent in matches, which you don't want to do. You don't want the game to feel totally unfair. So right now, if a player is one level off, it doesn't seem that bad because your skill could sort of outweigh that statistical advantage. But if that becomes 2 to 3 levels off, or if the card levels are several levels off, and you start feeling like you're just consistently a statistical advantage or disadvantage, at that point, you'd want to consider tweaking your matchmaking formula to put a greater emphasis on closer stat ranges between players that you match. But it's still possible, given the skill-based aspect of Clash Royale gameplay, that you wouldn't need to do that even if you added a fair amount of stats to the game.
Right. And it's not like you're suggesting you add 30 levels all at once, right? You're adding one level at a time. You could even supplement with AI or bots to some degree. So it seems like it would be manageable.
Exactly. It's always good to slowly add content over time.
Right.
Not only does it, give players the sort of feeling that, the game keeps expanding, but you also will have more player data, analytics data around those levels that you added to inform your choices of how to balance the levels you add after that.
Okay. Cool. Is there anything else to add about our tip number 1?
When choosing what to take from a game like Clash Royale, just try and ask yourself, okay, what is this doing for me? The chess system that Clash Royale has, it's great because it basically eliminates the need for an artificial limiting factor like energy, because once all your chess slots are full, the game's basically telling you either you spend or your session is more or less done, because it doesn't make sense to play when all your treasure slots are full. So if you wanted a game with no energy mechanic, the chess system from Clash Royale is great. But if you're already planning to use energy, you may want to rethink, okay, does it make sense to still take the chest opening mechanic if I have an energy system? So just think about, try to ask yourself, what is the reason that you're taking certain mechanics from other games to incorporate into yours, and try to think, okay, what am I bringing to the table or solving by adopting this mechanic? And if you could justify your choices in taking mechanics inspired by other games, that will make your game better because you've been more deliberate in your design choices and taking inspiration from other games.
Cool. So maybe I have one last question for you. So, one of the guys that we know, another game designer, Javier Barnes, suggested that maybe one thing that Clash Royale could potentially do is use kind of like the Hearthstone notion of card sets or packs or, whatever seasons. What do you think about that? If somebody launched a Clash Royale type game with that kind of a monetization system, do you have any thoughts in terms of what the potential impact of that would be?
Yeah. So, with any sort of real-time strategy game, one of the worst things that could happen is if players just get grouped into some strategies that are just optimal, and those are the only strategies they pursue. And the problem with that is it limits the number of cards that they're going to focus on optimizing, because different strategies only need certain card combinations. So that's definitely where you don't want to be. So one way to prevent that from happening is, a term that, gamers refer to as shaking up the meta, which means, in general, changing how, cards are played, or changing stats within cards, or, how they work, in order to make sure that the same strategies that worked before aren't necessarily continuing to be optimal going forward. There's two ways to shake up the meta. One is rebalancing cards that are live, and whether players accept occasional rebalances, it's almost like it differs game by game. I've seen some games where players hate every time cards are rebalanced. I've seen other games, and I think Clash Royale is one, where they've generally been a little more tolerant of rebalancing cards as the game continues to age. Games like Hearthstone and Magic the Gathering, which was the inspiration, have used a more artificial sort of way of shaking up the meta, in that they have only certain sets of cards being sort of eligible for ranked play at a given time. And so what that does is, strategies that may have made you sort of do very well in the past may no longer be at your disposal, because the cards from certain sets that you really use, you can't use anymore. And so you must invest in some of the new card sets. Both rebalancing and those artificial sets theoretically will achieve the same thing. It's probably easier to have artificial limitations on what sets you can play, but again, it's one of those things where you need to be really careful about how your players are going to take that. And so it's good if you're doing a card-based game and you want to use sort of the artificial limitations, that Hearthstone and Magic the Gathering use, to set that expectation from the beginning, so that players don't think that they could use all the cards at any time. You definitely want to create situations where only certain cards or sets of cards can be used, just to make sure you're communicating to your players that they are not going to be able to use all their cards at all times in the game. And that'll give you the flexibility to play around with artificial rules about which sets could be used when, and make your job of shaking up the meta a lot easier.
Got it. All right, cool. Well, that's all the questions that I have. Any final thoughts on tip one, or?
May 2021 bring successful development of some really awesome games, and don't copy Clash Royale's economy.
Got it. All right. Thanks, Jeff. Until next time, stay tuned for our next episode, tip 2 from Jeff Witt. Thanks, Jeff.